Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Solving Retail's Most Expensive Problem, the Silver Lining to Holiday Returns. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks so much, Drew, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for what's really turned out to be one of the hotter topics this holiday season. I'm honored to be here with Navjit Bhasin, Graziano De Boni, and Guy Hipwell to discuss how returns reduction offers a healthier path forward for retailers in 2021. Newmine's Chief Returns Officer is the first and only prescriptive analytics platform that harnesses the power of artificial intelligence to dramatically improve retailers' top and bottom lines through sustainable returns reduction, which, once again, as sustainability and CSR are on the top of all of our minds, is increasingly important. Unlike other returns-focused solutions that make the returns process easier or more manageable, only Newmine's Chief Returns Officer actually reduces in-season returns. The platform can be up and running in less than a month and has a 4 to 6 month ROI and can reduce returns by at least 10%. Navjit Bhasin is the founder and CEO of Newmine and is truly an expert in strategy, technology, operations, and change management. As a veteran entrepreneur, he's worked in the hands-on roles for hundreds of retailers and consumer brands. He maintains a key eye for creative ways to fund growth initiatives and increase profitability. Newmine's vision is to ensure retailers thrive in a transforming world. Joining here are two members of the Newmine Advisory Board, and we're honored to welcome both Graziano and Guy today. Graziano De Boni is a highly regarded executive. I'm sure many of you know him, with over 25 years of senior leadership in the fashion, luxury, and retail industry, having worked as CEO of Valentino Americas, Prada Americas, and Armani Americas. With an early adopter instinct, Graziano is known for really spearheading technological transformation at these organizations and driving next-gen luxury commerce. Guy Hipwell is well recognized in Europe as an expert in all things digital, including digital transformation. He's held senior board level positions with retailers in the UK and continental Europe. Guy has run complex international omnichannel organizations operating simultaneously across countries with different languages, different currencies, legalities, and consumer behaviors, which certainly complicates the approach. As a co-founder of Brezilliant, he also combines commercial expertise and special forces military skills to develop resilient, high-performing teams in the corporate world. Welcome, Navjit, Graziano, and Guy. We're excited to have all of you with us today.
Thank you, Deborah, for having us.
Thank you. So you get the first question, Navjit. Okay. When it comes to returns, how will this holiday be different from previous years, and what can we learn from that?
Well, Deborah, let me start by saying that 2020 has been a different year that most of us had never seen in our lives. And because of COVID, because of the pandemic, e-commerce has gone through the roof. And as e-commerce has grown, returns have grown at the same pace. Just as a quick stat, in this holiday season, e-commerce was up by 30%, which means returns were trailing right behind it. And not to mention, the freight providers like FedEx, UPS, they have a finite network, and their networks are strained right now. And on top of it, with the vaccine distribution starting yesterday or over the weekend, is going to strain the whole logistics network even more, which means not only are the outbound shipments going to get impacted, but even the returns are going to be impacted. And imagine the cost of those reverse logistics, which are going to cause a lot more profitability issues for the retailers.
Now, that's an excellent point, and certainly a very interesting and unique holiday season of which we've all learned so much. Graziano, you have a very interesting philosophy on returns and returns reduction. Can you share that with us?
Graziano, you're on mute, and Guy, you're on mute as well.
Sorry about that. Nice to be with you, Deborah, Navjit, and Guy again. Thank you for having me. It made me think about what's happening this year in terms of business in different aspects of a business process. And one of my takeaway from my observing and learning from what's happening this year is that really returns needs to take a different seat at the table of a business, of a company. I call it the E-cube position or effect. What do I mean by that? returns have a triple effect, right? The economic effect, like Navjit was just saying, on the top line of a business and on the bottom line of a business. But they also have an environmental impact on the business and on society in general, which is something that has become and will become even more impactful, particularly for younger generation consumers. And then there is an emotional impact in terms of managing the consumer expectations and the outcome of the experience that she's having and once she buys, particularly on e-commerce online, and gets the package at home with nobody there from the brand or from the retailers watching, assisting, and helping her. So I think that businesses will have to probably, in my opinion, reconsider or relook at returns and try to figure out how to put and enhance attention, maybe even higher organizational responsibilities when it comes to something that can affect something like 20%, maybe 25%, if you're lucky, 10 to 15% of your products and your business overall.
No, it's words for all of us to live by. You know, guys, we think about this, and with my former Wall Street background, I mean, I remember some of the very large retailers, you know, kind of discussing, you know, this topic and how they were addressing it. It was more through kind of pushing up, you know, rolling up the sleeves as opposed through new tech. So how does this increase in returns, you know, kind of financially impact retailers, and is it sustainable?
Yeah, great question. I think the financial impact is significant, and in a lot of cases is dramatically underestimated, I think. You know, a lot of the teams are focused only on creating that initial sale, and once it's gone outbound, they sort of fire and forget. But there's all of the hidden cost of the returns. You know, the cost that's not only down to the logistics and the reverse logistics processing, but also the cost of marking down, reprocessing stock, putting back the sale, so the reduced margin going forward. And I think what we've seen, you know, one of the things that COVID has done, which Navjit mentioned earlier, is it's absolutely, you know, rocketed e-com in terms of the mix of online versus offline. You know, here in the UK, we've had some just phenomenal shifts in terms of the patterns because we've had lockdown. So basically offline has gone to zero, and online has grown in several orders of magnitude. But stats for Black Friday and the holiday weekend in October, for example, have shown that the average order value has actually decreased in a lot of cases. But the top line's gone up, cost per acquisition has gone up. So what you're seeing is a squeezing on margin, and ultimately, on the main difference between, I'm generalizing massively, but the main difference between online and offline is with online sales, you're operating a variable cost model. So returns, people have to get a handle on it, and it has to become financially sustainable. How they do that, I think, is going to differ from one retailer to another, but as a start, they've got to understand what's going on.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that they can learn from each other as well, because some of it is around, right, the sale itself, and, you know, whether it's personalized fit or other kind of topics from that perspective, but, you know, kind of at the front. And then there's, right, the tech in between, and then there's the actual return itself. And you know, we're seeing, you know, I'd say some ingenuity, but certainly we're far from, you know, kind of getting to a sustainable place. Navjit, what can retailers learn from holiday returns data to really improve their financial picture, if you will? Because that's what everyone's thinking about right now.
Well, you know, along with a lot of returns that are going to come back, there's going to be a lot of data available as well. And what we've seen out there is at least 65% of the returns can be controlled by the retailer. And when I say can be, it's not necessarily that they're controlling it today, because either they can't get to the root cause of that return in time to take an action. By the time they get to understand their data or even know what to do with it, season's already gone by, they moved on to the next season. So being proactive is really the name of the game over here. What can they learn earlier on in the season that can impact the latter half of the selling season? And I think that's what it really boils down to. every retailer that we've interacted with, or at least we know of in the last 20 years, especially with e-com growing, everybody wants to be a data-driven organization. But by just saying data-driven doesn't mean you're able to get to taking action, getting the insights, and all of the above. It's really about, can we get you the insight in the right time to take an action? And that's what's really going to make a difference at the end of the day. That's what's going to cause or create financial benefit for the retailer.
No, you're absolutely right. And I want to review the poll because it's really interesting for those of you who haven't had the chance to look at it yet. But how does your organization view customer return volume this holiday season? 60% say it'll be significantly higher. How does your organization view returns? And this is interesting, is only certain groups, and I think, Navjit, these are some of the challenges you and I run into, but only certain groups recognize the value of, kind of what this challenge is. And then how are you planning to handle holiday returns? Because I think that this is unprecedented. It's literally kind of across the board. Some people are adding additional staff, other incentives to keep the product, right? Encouraging more store returns. And then, kind of the rest is other, because I think everyone's just trying to do their best, which I very much appreciate, especially with the sustainable aspect of this. And then lastly, how important is sustainability to your company's mission? Let's say 60% said it's an important company value. And I think that it will only continue to become more important in the years ahead. And, this topic will continue to grow in importance as we realize the connection between sustainability and returns reduction. All right, so Graziano.
Deborah, if I may just add one point, because of the question number 2 that you brought up, it's, no retailer today is equipped to handle even increasing volume of returns, because it not only requires manpower in the DC, it requires physical space in the DC as well. And in fact, last week, CBRE made a big press release around how the $90 billion of returns just in the holiday season are going to require millions of warehouse space, labor to process them. Imagine the backlog that's going to be there. And if you can't process returns, you can't process refunds, which ultimately means customer is going to be impacted.
Well, and an important point with that, right, is that the longer that they're delayed, the ability for that product, right, if it's in saleable condition, to get back onto the shelf in season is something that I've thought very much about during, right, because, I appreciate it, right, we all want, kind of retailers to be generous with consumers, but right, because there's these really long return windows now, right, if product that was purchased in November isn't being received back till January and it can't get on the shelves till end of February, if you will, the value of that merchandise will certainly not be what it was in November. And so there's different ways to look at, kind of the sustainability and the profitability for retailers. And many of it won't be able to be, sold in the condition that it's received or the time. So I do think there's something to be said about timeliness. And Graziano, how has consumer behavior and expectations changed since March of this year?
Well, we have seen a dramatic increase on the digitizations of businesses and the use of the digital space by consumers. I mean, how many more people are buying online, even people that's older generations, boomers, and so they never actually maybe bought things online. So there's been dramatic changes, and there has been dramatic adoption of new tools and new things. And now that we are talking about finally really, a data-driven business and a digital world, it's important to really, recognize that, and I think some companies have started to recognize the fact that the digital commerce, because today's days we're talking about live streaming commerce, social media commerce, voice-activated commerce, you name it, needs to be really addressed in a different way by companies in general. And the consumers are getting a lot savvier on where they're buying and from whom they're buying and so forth. And praising the brands that have the transparency and the courage to stand up for something, or giving a chance to a brand newcomer, to a brand new young brands that is surfacing, as a pure player online and even on a marketplace, and really, giving a chance to that. So there's a lot of things that the consumers has done differently. There's a lot of things the brands have done differently, but maybe not enough on the return side. Just to go back to talk about returns, because again, when returns were 5% of your business, you manage as part of the dilutions, right? Together with the discounts, markdowns, and so forth. Now that a lot of businesses are seeing that actually returns because of e-commerce are becoming so significant, they're even making the markdowns to the department stores look like nothing, almost in that respect. So they're gonna have to really take a serious look at how to address it. And there is multiple things like Navjit was saying, and there's already tools that can be implemented to mitigate in advance using technology, using AI to mitigate their return effects and make everybody happy. Because I go back to what I was saying earlier. To me, one of the biggest concerns should be for a brand, really the consumer loyalty. And let's not discount that she's happy to send it back and to have, as you were saying, a 2 months window to return it. But the fact that she bought it to begin with, she probably would have been happier to keep it if it fit her, if it had the characteristics that she wanted, and so forth. So brands have so much room to go in addressing all that experience and in addressing the final happiness and fulfillment of the need of the consumer that buys mostly online. Long way to go.
No, you're absolutely right. And you bring up some excellent points as well. And, what we've seen in some cases, right, if there's just from a customer service associate perspective, right, if they're properly trained in terms of, right, when the customer calls up and has questions, right, I mean, there's so many ways, but almost having kind of like a toolkit, right, in terms of, we're aware that this is a challenge and what do we do differently in 21, right, for many, right, the 2020 cake is baked.
Absolutely. But we have learned already some few things that makes a big difference on shopping online, right? So, for example, the description of the product, the copy on the product is critical. And it's still a task most brands relegated to some interns that just writes up, okay, what that product is, okay, maybe without even knowledge, okay? How many times you see a product that doesn't have, dimensions or things? I was really astonished a couple of days ago. I was buying something online, something large, and they did not have the dimensions of the product. It says, is it gonna fit my elevator? I don't know. It's things like that. It's very critical. Or the other thing that is making a big difference, particularly in apparel, is the fit, right? The size. Now, I give credit to certain, particularly activewear brands, because I remember I used to buy sneakers from the same brands, and every time I had to bracket buying, size up, size down, because I wasn't sure. They changed models, wasn't sure the new model fit me, and many times it was not the same fit, right? Now, that brand has corrected. I buy different models, it's always my size. I love that. But many other businesses have yet to learn how to be consistent in their fit, so that the consumer that buys those pants, that buys that shirt or that blouse or that dress, she doesn't have to buy 3 to keep 1. Save the environment, save time to her, because she doesn't like to go back to UPS or FedEx to drop the box that she has to return. It's a waste of time, right? So technology can help a lot in a lot of these fields. And that's why I think there is a big hope and a big opportunity ahead for businesses.
No, I think you're right. And the other thing, not only in terms of the actual product description or PDPs, but also having embedded video, right? So that the customer can get, a whole 360 and whatnot, so that they really know what they're buying. And certainly dimensions matter for many products. And so I think that's
great point. I don't want to take too much time here, but another thought is it opens up another aspects of the sustainable or the ESG conversations. Still, most brands, if not all of them, that I know at least, when you shop online, particularly for apparel, they have only one model pictures, and usually it's sample size. I welcome the day the brands are gonna have pictures of all the different sizes, so that I can look at the fit of that garment on my size besides whatever, body scanning technology is coming up and all that, that will give you a better idea if that garments, will fit your body type. Okay, instead of just looking great on a model and you get it, says, oh my God, no, because the grading that they've done when they did, the grading of the different sizes was so off, which happens most of the time, unfortunately, or many times, affects that. So that there's a bunch of other things that brands can do to mitigate and reduce the chance of returns.
Yeah, and one other item along that thread, what we're seeing is one of the reasons, right, live streaming, from a kind of returns perspective is doing so well, is they often will use, much more kind of real world, a lot of times the streamers themselves, right, are customer service associates and whatnot. And so this idea of more real world sizing. And so, right, I know what this garment's going to look like on me. And I think there's the whole dialogue, right? This is what size I am. Oh, I have these, right? And so I think that we are seeing, right, kind of new ways of selling, but they're still very nascent and it's still very early, but it is interesting in terms of some of the new technology. Once again, probably more of a 21, 22 opportunity, but, really quite interesting. Guy, as we, kind of dig into your background, how have you seen returns, negatively impacting the customer experience? I mean, personally, I can think of like waiting in line behind someone who's returning something, and the retailer isn't so excited to get it back, and you're like, I'm just trying to, purchase this great item. What have you seen, and what have you seen, kind of retailers do to mitigate that?
Well, I think there's two. So, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about customer centricity in business, saying we're going to be customer centric, but customer first. You've had the appointment of chief customer officers, that position being created on the board, and a lot of what's been done has been sort of looking at processes. So the processes of outbound and the process of return, simplifying the process of return, and different legislations in different countries allow consumers to do this, so that's fine. But people actually haven't looked at. They've overlooked the fact that although it's convenient to return it, maybe the customer didn't actually want to return it in the first place. They were disappointed. So you've focused on getting the parcel day, next day, whatever, all of this super efficiency. And then the disappointment when you open something up and think, it's not what I ordered, it's not the same color, or you try it on, it's not the right size. There is definitely a negative effect there. And then there is the inconvenience, no matter how good your returns logistic process is, of the fact that you've got to send it back and order another one. So all of that sort of, I'm getting it tomorrow, then is gone, right? Because you had to send it back. It wasn't what you expected. So your expectations are set and then they're missed. And that's, I think, then, where certainly, I mean, if that's your first experience with the interaction with a brand, then I believe IBM, I think it was published statistics saying 80% of people won't then shop with that brand again. If that's the first interaction, you get the wrong thing or something that is not what you expected, then it's just not really going to build any confidence in the service that brand can provide you, no matter how fast they got you the parcel or the fact that you could print off your return documentation. Ideally, and agreed, there are some, as Graziano spoke about himself, in the fashion, certainly in the apparel sector, where people will order a size up and size down. But for a lot of other categories, your intention is not to send it back. You're not going to try it on. And so when you get something that's not what you want and you have to send it back, it is a disappointment and it's inconvenient. And let's face it, I think that the reason that Amazon is the size it is not because their product range is unique. They sell all the stuff you can get anywhere else, but it's just convenient. They're the biggest seller of time in the world in convenience. And that's what people have become accustomed to. And having to return something, if that's not what you plan to do, is inconvenient.
That's an excellent point. How, if you can help us, those of us who are based in the US, think about the difference in terms of whether it's values or just how do European customers think about returns versus, the US?
So I think that it's generally and probably now globally expected that consumers will be able to return product, that they have the right to return. And a lot of the time those costs will be borne by the retailer, which touches on what we were saying earlier in terms of the real impact on margin, bottom line that the returns process has. And it actually varies even in Europe, but from one country to another. So you've got differences in return rates between, for example, Germany and Netherlands and the UK. In that order, Germany has the biggest returns in terms of power, and then the Netherlands and the UK, although the UK's sales are larger in power online. And actually some of that is down to the payment, the tender type. So in Germany, the vast majority of e-com transactions are done on invoice. So the consumer hasn't actually paid for the products yet, and then they've got the returns window to send them back. So all that cash constraint is actually handled by the retailer. Whereas in the UK, it's very different. We wait for clearance of the payment before we send the product out, which I think is very similar to the US. But the expectation is that you, and in fact, the legislation supports the fact that you have the right to return. But a lot of the time, it's not what you were intending to do. When you placed the order in the first place, you wanted to keep the item. And I think that's universal.
You used to be guy used to be in retail, and having her walking into the physical store, I used to say, was 50% of the game. Now that 50% of the game is her to actually check out the basket online, but there is always the other 50% that needs to be taken care of, right? Having her to actually keep it. And that experience that used to be live in the stores, controlled by the brand, controlled by the sales associates, the store manager, and so forth. Now it's to a big extent actually unknown to the brands or to the retailer, because it happens in her home or wherever. And I think that the opportunity is exactly there, as you were saying, to actually improve that experience, and for the brands to use data to collect that experience. And I welcome also the day that some brands move on from having to fill out a stupid questionnaire that you've written that you have to send back with your returns, and actually adopt more, as you were saying, the Amazon module of filling it up online and all that. That allows tools like Navjit's Newmine, to capture that data and to be able to predict what items will be returns ahead of time rather than waiting for those returns to show up.
Graziano and Guy, you both brought up a point. Guy, you mentioned Chief Customer Officer, and Graziano, you mentioned Chief Experience Officer, right? None of the retailers have somebody called Chief Returns Officer. Their returns may be 20, 30%, which could be hundreds of millions of returns. And there's no one owner accountable to manage it well.
Yep.
Who should that person be?
I think that's Deborah. I think that's there's every brand or every business, right, have a senior level, senior management executives, right, dedicated to business processes. And then there is somebody in charge of sales or retails or DTC and so forth. I think, as Navjit is saying, and I've been saying as well, there is a seat at that executive table for somebody to oversee returns when they really, represents 20% of the volume that you generate, because it's not just lost sales and cost to manage the returns. But on the other side, there is a loyalty problem, an emotional problem with your customers that affects future business in a substantial way. And by the way, being able to reduce in a preventive way using prescriptives, those returns allows your top lines to grow without making any additional efforts. You don't have to invest in new customers acquisition cost, correct? Automatically. And we all know that top line growth allows for every other expense of the business to grow, because that's the way a P&L is set up. So if you work on that, and if you really bring the level of responsibility to the highest level of organizations, I think that mindsets of businesses will be changed, and new technology will definitely be implemented to mitigate this phenomenal increase in returns.
That's a really great point. So I'm going to ask the panel one last question, and then we'll turn to you, the audience. So if you haven't had the chance yet, please drop your question at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to it in just a second. So Navjit, this last question, a very important one for you. What do we mean by, or what do you mean by sustainability, and why is this important to retailers in the years ahead?
So Deborah, the way we look at sustainability is there are two parts of it. One is the financial sustainability of a retailer. You know, we all hear about the bankruptcies that have happened, and won't be surprised in the next 60 days to see more bankruptcies, right? So that's the financial sustainability of a retailer. Secondly, which is even a bigger topic, is environmental sustainability. Just imagine all the returns that are coming back. Not only it is, you know, the reverse logistics, fuel costs, packaging costs, labor costs, carbon footprint. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And companies like Nordstrom, if you go check their annual reports, I mean, they're a big believer in the whole CSR initiative. So they are recognizing that there is a big value in promoting sustainability. And I think, Graziano, you mentioned earlier, that plays into the consumer loyalty as well. And imagine the next generation of consumers, they are going to be much more savvier around sustainability, in my opinion.
No, I think and they'll choose which retailers to shop based on that as well. So I think it's really very important. It's a very good point. All right, so we'll kick it off with the audience Q&A. So first, what are the new strategies towards minimizing returns and impulse spending? Any one of you guys?
Well, the technology I think that we're talking about is you know, the applications of today's artificial intelligence to be able to really do the work in preventing returns as much as possible. Navjit said earlier that 65%, so 2/3 of returns, are controllable by a brand or a retailers. And I want to go back to that actually, because I think it's a very, very important. Consumer will always be king or queen, and we'll have to respect that naturally. On the other side, companies can implement the tools, the technology, to really be able to analyze social media comments on products, feedbacks, any kind of data that is available, to really incorporate it and process it to give out the analytics and the prescriptives to say, hey, by the way, you know, people are saying on Instagram that, you know, this shoe looks ugly, okay? You know, nobody's gonna buy it, which also then facilitates not just, you know, the case of returns, but possible also markdown strategies by a brand and so forth. There is also the aspect of planning. So a tool like Newmine is, I love it, and that's one of the reasons why I also got involved. I know that I want to brag about your tool, Navjit.
Thank you, Graziano.
But you know, we were always planning businesses, okay, and planning sell-throughs at the SKU levels, for sure at the category level merchandise, many times at the SKU levels. I don't know how many businesses are planning returns at the SKU level in today's business, and then measuring that, and again, implementing technology that can mitigate and can achieve those returns targets in a reduced scale possible. So there's a lot of stuff the company can do and can be done. There is technology already now available to do that. And to the second part of the question, yeah, I think that any customer, and Guy said it earlier as well, any consumer that buys online, that gets a product, chances are she wants to keep it. So it's more of the task, in my opinion, of the brands and the retailers to do the right job, to get the right product, the right fit, and so forth, with the right communications, with the right sustainable point of view to facilitate the closing of that transactions and make everybody happy.
Sorry, Deborah, can I just chip in?
Yes,
I think that I'm not sure there's a direct correlation between impulse buys and returns, and impulse buys is something that retailers have tried to actually encourage for decades, you know. But I think that even with an impulse buy, if the intent is actually to keep it, then really this is a question about understanding why the returns come back. Whether it's been an impulse buy or not, that's to me what it is. It's about being able to measure this and, well, actually not only being able to measure it, but doing it and taking action. There are so many things that may have led to a misunderstanding between the consumer in terms of what they thought they were getting and then what they received. You could look at photography, you could look at product copy, and then when it comes back, you could look at what's happened within your organization. It could be the supplier has changed, or it could be the same supplier, but they've changed manufacturing plant, or to Graziano's point, the block has changed, and therefore, what he thought was his shoe size is now no longer his shoe size. You don't dig into this information, you'll never really understand why stuff is coming back, and then if you don't understand it, you're not able to do anything about it, and you'll just be caught in this constant loop of sending stuff out, and it comes back, and then you're thinking, oh, some products have a big returns rate and some don't, and then I end up marking these down, and you build that into your market. But if you really dig into and try and understand it, you're hopefully able to minimize the volume that comes back, because the customer's going, great, that's exactly what I wanted.
That's an excellent point. We saw, it was very interesting early in the holiday season, one of the banks put in place where you yourself as a consumer, kind of could utilize this technology to basically stop your impulse buying from like a particular retailer. And so it was but it was this idea, right, of thinking twice before you hit the buy button. And so we have seen some technology, but it's, it's still very early on. But there certainly, are folks who are trying to address this. So our next question comes from Angela. It's an interesting one. Amazon allows you to keep your returns of some of the products. Do you think this is a sustainable way of managing the business? How is it even possible? And are they passing the cost to their suppliers?
Okay,
well,
so I don't know whether they are passing the cost to their suppliers. I'd imagine it's built into their model somehow. But clearly the reason they're doing that is they've worked out that the cost of the reverse logistics and then reprocessing, putting that item back into stock, even if it is able to put it back into stock, it is not worth it, and they're better off telling the consumer to keep hold of it, and that's actually more cost effective for them.
Well, what I believe Deborah, Amazon is doing is they are excellent at their analytics. They know what to look after, meaning how to get the right insights that help them make business decisions. And in that particular case, they already know, hey, it's going to cost me $5 to ship it back. Versus, you know what? It's not worth it because I'm not going to make that much margin. So it's really about acting smartly on the data that you have. So it really boils down to having the right tools at the right time.
No, you're absolutely right. All right, we've got many more questions, but I'm going to pick two. What is your view and impact of returns on luxury versus non-luxury retailers and brands? Is there a difference? And that's from Donnie. Thank you, Donnie.
I think there is, to a degree, there is a difference. I think that the luxury customer doesn't have any, different kind of mindset about returning a luxury item versus a non-luxury item. I think that the mindset, and I'm waiting to see what luxury brands are going to be doing more in that respect. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if the process will be quite different. So we know that a lot of product returns for huge, mass brands ends up to 3PLs, warehouses, and already kind of pre-sold to third-party retailers. So the actual brands doesn't kind of own that piece anymore after it was sold the first time. It couldn't care less about returns. It's just built in their margins. I don't see, of course, luxury doing that at all. Maybe luxury will do even the opposite. Maybe luxury, instead of having products going back to the warehouse like it's doing now, maybe they will force the customers to an extent to send the return back. Actually, doesn't have to force the customer. They will have to send the label to return the product back to a store, which will make it a better chance for that brand to sell something else, but also a different experience when the return is received by the sales associates, unwrapped, can have a better life afterwards. So I think that from a consumer point of view, I don't know how much different it will be. I think from the company process point of view, it'll be very different between luxury brands and more mass brands, for sure.
That's a great answer, sir. All right, last question. If you could each leave those retailers and brand owners on the call one thought regarding returns, what would that be? Guy, we're going to start with you.
Okay, put me on the spot. It would be measure it, because honestly, I would guarantee that until you start looking at it, you don't know what you're missing. And there is an awful lot of product coming back that actually shouldn't have come back if you got stuff right in the first place.
That's great. Graziano?
I could not agree more with Guy. It's absolutely use the avalanche of data, of analytics that is available, collected, use the right tool to get all the data, because it will help you not only reduce returns, but will help you also understand what else is going to be selling better than those returns. So it's a double advantage to be able to really start using data to analyze returns and expand from there.
Great. Navjit?
The best return is the one that never has to happen.
That's very true. I mean, I think, you know, that what we're seeing is certainly an issue that has been in the industry for many years. It's very much bubbling to the top, I think, because of some of the changes this year. But like with, you know, Newmine's chief returns officers, there's now technology. So it's not just like, oh my gosh, we have this issue. There's actually technologies that can be utilized to address it. And I think, to me, that's what's really most critical, because retailers don't feel so helpless. And I think
eventually, Deborah, exactly. And eventually, I think that there is a role or slightly different roles also for brand and retailers to play in the messaging and the communications regarding online sales. Because so far, because the e-commerce is, you know, only 25, 30 years old, pretty much. So relatively still new in the world of retail, which is thousands of years old. Mm-hmm. We have been, as consumers, we have been really bombarded with the message of getting it sooner, okay, and getting it free. And that does not help the environment at all. That's not a sustainable approach. Eventually, brands will have to be more sensitive and communicate with the customers that's just buying 3 and sending 2 back. Yeah, so you know, okay, to a degree, but just be aware, okay, that you are polluting the world, okay, that you are causing more carbon dioxide in the environment and so forth. And to an extent, I would expect some brands to start to actually eventually, you know, address that in their communications and make every consumer more sensible. I mean, look at Amazon. I love one of the things that they did when they said, do you really want it tomorrow? Or if you wait, you know, 3 more days, I'll give you $1 credit. You know, how many of us have used that for some items that, yeah, I can wait 3 days. I don't need it tomorrow. And yeah, even for small things, there could be a small loyalty program, you know, points that you get or whatever that helps mitigate that environmental impact of returns.
And Deborah, the final point I'll leave with this, you know, retailers spend millions of dollars on enabling loyalty programs, generating top-line revenue, but by the time it comes to net revenue, there's that big bucket of returns which nobody's proactively addressing. And you know, it doesn't have to be a long, year-long initiative. We've gotten our clients up and running in less than 30 days. And you know what? If we can help you save $1 million a month, go figure.
It really translates to the bottom line. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Navjit, Guy, and Graziano, for a wonderful discussion. And this closes out actually for Coresight. This is our final event of the year. So everyone stay tuned for 2021, which I am sure will be every bit as exciting as what we talked about today. So thank you, everyone, and happy holidays.